I realize that the conception of these giant creatures, they're called Bigfoot, is a fantastic subject, and a lot of people scoff at it and don't believe it. But I believe it. I'm convinced that these creatures exist, and I'm going to prove it if it takes me the rest of my life.
Hello and welcome to the Phenomenon Report. I'm Kelly Kleiman. Well, since fake news is the sub-theme of 2020, behind, of course, COVID-19 and the election, I thought we'd explore the dark world of Bigfoot hoaxing, which is truly a disservice to all of us who take the subject seriously. Tonight's guest is a gentleman who is not only an active Sasquatch tracker and author of 3 books, which we'll get into a little bit later, but he's also a debunker of hoaxes. He calls himself the Squatch Detective, but the government, friends, and family know him as Steve Kulls, Mr. Steve Kulls. If you don't live next to him, you might be able to find him on the History Channel, Nat Geo, Destination America, or the Travel Channel, where he's also been known to make an appearance. His work can be found all over the internet. Try the Steve Kulls channel on YouTube, Squatch Detective on Facebook, and on the hub of all of his activity on squatchdetective.com. Today's show is going to address Steve's own experiences in the field, as well as taking a look into the most famous Sasquatch hoaxes that you may believe to be authentic. At the end of the show, we'll also unveil what we individually think are the 3 most legit Sasquatch sightings in history, and which 3 are the biggest hoaxes. I wonder where the Patterson Gimlin film falls in that mix. Steve, welcome.
Hey, how are you, Kelly?
Doing good. What got you into Sasquatching, Bigfooting, loving the subject, and you also had some encounters. I want you to go through those. There were 3
Sure.
of them, and you did gather some evidence with those, so they're pretty legit. What happened to you?
Okay, so I had I was exposed to this as a young child, had an interest as a adolescent, but as became a teen, cars and girls became more important, so it kind of went by the wayside. I started my career path as a career investigator on a professional basis, became a trained forensic interviewer, and then about 1998, a person showed me a book, said, "Hey, you might want to read this," and it was about Bigfoot sightings in my area. And like a lot of people, rather, I thought Bigfoot was confined to just the Pacific Northwest. Well, I was wrong. There was actually sightings that occurred within a couple hours of my house, hour and a half, 2 hours. So it intrigued me. So I delved in, being the investigator I am, to figure out if this stuff was on the level or not. And I found that, hey, you know what? A lot of this stuff is on the level. After talking to some police officers and firefighters and scientists that had sightings. So fast forward to a few incidents that occurred over my 20 plus years of doing this. It took me 7 years, and in 2006, I was doing some research in an area that I had been brought to by not just one witness, by several witnesses. And we heard something moving around us to one side, and boom, got hit with this awful smell. Now, I'm also an ex-paramedic, so I know what a dead body smells like. I'm very attuned to, but this thing was like death, skunk, musk, wet dog, all rolled up into one. And it just, boom, it was there. And then just like it was there, it was gone. There was no after scent, no fading, no nothing. It was there and gone. So we began to it was getting dusk, so we began to look out and walk out, and we noticed to the trail we had just come up. Hand side, and then finding a track to our left-hand side, we cast. The next day we came back in daylight and actually found the track well. It's an incredible piece of evidence because there's something physical to it, but the experience behind it. And I wasn't alone. There were several other people there, and including my mentor, Rand. So we had all had the full gamut of an experience there, with the only exception being a sighting. Fast forward 10 years, about 5 more years down the road, and I was in the same area, and I had my team in at the campfire. After a couple of hours of being out, we bring the team in, have a bite to eat, talk, explain our experiences, take a rest. And I go out to my car to get batteries and for my headlamp, and I go out and I grab the batteries, and I close my door, and I spin around, and I light up a cigarette, and I shine my flashlight down the north end of the roadway there, the dirt road, which is at a downhill grade. Nothing. I spin around to the uphill side, which was the south side, And there, standing next to a utility pole, very close to the utility pole, was this 7 to 8 foot tall creature. And the eyes were reflecting back. You could see the eye shine. They were like orange. They weren't quite yellow. They weren't quite red, but they were kind of like an orange color. And the first thing it did, it kind of looked behind it a bit, and it spun around, and it froze, and I froze because I just kept the light on there. And after about 45 seconds of this, I shook the light a little bit. It turned, and it walked in to the south side of the camp. And the funny thing is I bring a team out, and I had a team documentarian there who had a video camera. So they were doing some creation, or not creations, but they were doing some investigating, looking and trying to measure distance, height, stuff like that. They actually had found where it had stepped in. You could still see the dirt falling in, and they videoed that. Then next thing you hear on the radio very clearly, hey, we got a lot of movement to the southwest side of the camp. So whatever it was, had moved to the south side of the camp and was exiting. Fast forward a year after that, same area, same place. We're filming for Nat Geo. We had come in from Chautauqua Lake. So that was an 8+ hour drive with stops after just, we spent the weekend. I had a lecture out in Chautauqua, the Chautauqua Lake Bigfoot Expo. And for the first time I had met Bob. So I'm out where Nat Geo comes in, does some brief interviews. They knew we weren't going to go out and play. We were beat. They leave. One guy from Georgia, Jeff, he goes out to his Jeep to grab his pillow and blanket. It had been raining all. We've been collecting birch logs because birch, the oils in it burn, whether they're wet or not. Once that heat gets there, if you get a good kindling fire going, once that heat gets there, it opens up that and and it starts to burn the oils in the birch. And that's the primary trees we have in the Adirondack Park is birch, oak, and maple. So then, and oak and maple don't burn very well wet, that's for sure. Are staying up, and his wife Melissa went to bed. So we're talking for a little while. Then we decide to go to bed. And about an hour and a half in, nature called. So I had to use a tree. So I unzip my tent. I get out. Now, mind you, it'd been a full moon that night, but it was overcast. So it wasn't really bright, but it was kind of like a night light. So there's some very good, visual. And as I get out of the tent, I just happened to look towards the vehicles, which was to my left. My tent was kind of facing south. And I looked to my left, which would have been to the east. And there it is, a 5.5 foot, long-haired, brownish red, bipedal creature going right across. My first reaction to it was like, no, it just can't be. Used the tree, came back in. Of course, the next time I went out, probably another few hours down the road, because I don't sleep very well in the woods, but I made sure I brought a flashlight that time. And I got out of the tent. I was like, but there was nothing. So, I didn't say anything to anybody. And in the morning, to my attention by Jeff, who was putting his pillow and blanket back in because the rain, he didn't want to keep it wet in case his tent leaked. He was like, yo, someone put a birch log right behind my Jeep. And here's this about a 3.5 foot birch sitting behind his Jeep where he would have tripped over it the night previous. So what put that there? It was very curious. And we actually found where it had been plugged. And it was in the middle of this mucky pond because it had been raining all day. So something had actually pulled it out of the pond and put it behind his Jeep. So we found that very fascinating. And that's when I'm like, hey, guys, just to let you know what I believe I saw last night. And Wayne and Melissa later on in the day found a 9-inch track in that same area going perpendicular to where we were. So it was in the same directional wise, east-west, or north-south rather. So very fascinating experience there.
Yeah, and of course that track would correspond to the size of the...
Yeah, a 9-inch track for a 5.5 foot creature kind of makes sense. I mean, we have people that grow to be like 5'5", 5'7", 5'8", that may have a 9.5, have a 9.5. I'm a size 10, but so it makes kind of that sense that it would be a smaller track for a 5.5 foot one.
So let's get into the meat of the matter. But before we get into the meat of the matter, let's drop back about 7 years to what Some consider substantial evidence for the existence of Sasquatch from a DNA standpoint, and that's the work that Dr. Melba Ketchum has done. And you say no.
No, yeah, the uh, major crux is that the that she looked at is a human chromosome in the study. So if anything was really contaminated, it would show human DNA. That's one. Dr. Haskell Hart, who is a Harvard trained subject, PhD, who studied genetics. That study apart, showing that what they're actually showing is contamination, and that coinciding with Dr. geneticist who did a lot of stuff on the Himalayas in Nepal, who said, yeah, this is bear, this is sheep, this is dog, this is human contamination, is what's going on. And he wrote an entire book about his studies, and he had a whole section about the Ketchum study. Dr. Hart has a whole book about the study called the Sasquatch Genome Project, and the manner in which that it was launched, it wasn't done in proper scientific method. She had before it was peer reviewed, or after it had failed peer review. I'm not sure the exact timeline there, because we weren't getting a lot of great information from that. Believing that the Sasquatch is a people, she had mentioned that before the study came out. She had mentioned their mind speak and all this other stuff, and all this kind of really wild stuff. How they were braiding her horse's hair. She claims that she passed out once, and a Sasquatch was responsible for that. She failed peer reviews, and of course, what do people? Well, let me. Then she publishes in a journal, and she says, "Oh, we've gotten published. But the real world media was quick to say, "Hey, wait a minute, you bought that journal. What do you mean you've been published? And you bought it." So of course she would be published in it. She bought it, so it wasn't like a real publication that she was published in. So false narrative when they say, "Oh, we've been published." No, you haven't. You bought the publication and then you published it. This way, and the whole thing is all muddled in irregularity. Let's just put it that way. There was a lot of they looked at one chromosome instead of looking at several like they should have. There was a whole issue with the Justin Smeha stake, as you call it, the Bigfoot stake. Justin Smeha allegedly killed one, I believe, in the Olympic Mountains. Claimed to have a piece of meat. He had some of it by Dr. Sykes, and showed the same as all the other results, which is telling you that was off the same slab. And of course, Melba's study showed differently. Of course, like anybody else, like any other hoaxer, and this is why I believe there may be some malfeasance on here, is like any other hoaxer. What's the first thing they say? To say that there's a big conspiracy against them, which is just simply not true. There was a lot of people invested in it. I'll be the first one to say, well, we had all these other labs, come up with the same. Well, of course they came up with the same results. You get crap results from your place, you send it out and get crap results back, and then say, see, it's the same. It doesn't matter. They're still crap results, or they're still, mixed. And not to mention, she sent the primer out. If the primer's bad, she sends that out to the other labs, you're going to get the same results. So,
well, buying the media outlet to push your narrative is not unusual, right? Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post, and I think there's a lot of that goes on. But let's move on to the three Sasquatches that seem to be the most controversial. The first one is the Patterson Gimlin film. Now, anyone who knows Robert Gimlin swears he's an honest guy, a real dude's dude. However, Roger Patterson, not so much. Let's break down the aspects of the case that you believe to give it an authentic feel first, and then we'll get into the other stuff.
In every video, film, audio piece of evidence, there should be a good, congruent story behind it. There should be an after. And in the Patterson Gimlin film, there is that. There is a definite story in front of the whole nines. So that's a positive sign. Visually, and again, this is a matter of opinion because nobody was there. So And when I say nobody was there that's reviewing this here. Well, you see that herniation in the leg, that may be a positive. Can you see the breasts on the creature seem to bounce? That seems to be in favor. But like I say, that's all, how should I say it? That's all just opinion. No matter who it is, no matter if you have a photo analyst looking at it, they were not there. It's an opinion. Unless it was doctored, which it's not. It's just an opinion, whether it be an anthropologist, whether it be, Bob from the convenience store on the corner. All their opinions should be weighted the same, because it's what they're seeing. It's their interpretation of what they're saying. The only facts we have is the story, beginning to end. Now, there are some interlopers into this. Bob Hieronymus claims it was his suit. Put Bob and Philip together, which Greg Long, the author of a particular book that kind of tried to prove that the Patterson Gimlin film was a hoax. The same thing with Leroy Blevins. He tries to put Philip Morris and Bob Hieronymus together. The problem there is that Philip Morris and Bob Hieronymus do not describe the same suit. I believe Morris said Hieronymus says no, it's only like a 3-piece. The material that Morris had said he used was the material Bob Hieronymus said was used. So somebody there is not telling the truth. Maybe both of them. One of them is not telling the truth.
Yeah. Well, regarding the claim that even the best costume makers of the time couldn't make the Patty suit, Elon Musk can do things with rocketry that NASA, with all their experience, couldn't do by landing in the same location that they launch. And so costume making isn't a rocket science.
I understand. You got to look at the time period. We're in today, and we have all these tools available to us. Back then, they had a third of the tools when it came to making costumes. And when a person like John Chambers or Bill Munns, who particularly was involved in the industry at the time, said, there was nothing we could have made that would have compared to that, that has to be taken with some weight. But I have a caveat too. And here's the caveat. A lot of the enhancements were done by a person by the name of Marlon K. Davis. Now, since then, Marlon has said that, there's a Bigfoot massacre involved with the PG film based on seeing a little red tinting that he actually added to the film. He's also gone on to try to justify other videos which are known hoaxes and try to revisit them and prop them. So is there something in this that gave it a false look? Because if you look at the film of itself, it could be anything. It could be a suit of that day. Because if you think of don't think of the enhanced film. Let's look at the original.
Right. And
when you look at the original, because all these special effects artists were looking at all these enhancements. Let's look at the original film. I think that may have some weight to it. The other thing too is the character assassination on Roger Patterson. Yes, he didn't return the camera that he filmed the thing with. In fact, he was supposed to return it 5 months prior to when he even filmed it. And there was actually a warrant taken out against him for the theft of the camera. That is fact. It is also fact that about 5 years prior to the film, 4 or 5, Patterson did a sketch of a creature that looked a lot like the subject of the film, including having breasts, which I find amazing. Here you are drawing a creature with breasts, which really hadn't been done at that time. But now, all of a sudden, coincidentally, 4 or 5 years later, you have to film one with breasts. That makes a big discussion. Now, Dr. John Napier, who is a curator and entomologist at the Smithsonian, who was very to the theory that a Sasquatch may exist, or they may exist as a species. He actually, and why he didn't believe the Patterson Gimlin film was real. And a lot had to do with locomotion, which is beyond my pay grade. I'm an investigator, not a scientist. But there was something there that really flagged it. And what it said was the sagittal crest on the Patterson Gimlin film is that the sagittal crest is actually a function of a male creature or a male primate, not of the females. A lot of the females don't. So this opens up the argument, well, maybe, just maybe, the females of a Sasquatch have the sagittal crest too. Possibly, but I'm kind of weighing that into you're trying to stretch, you're trying to stretch science.
Yeah.
It's, we don't know any of it. If there's a species out there where the females had a sagittal crest of primate, or a species of primate has a sagittal crest that are female, then I would say, well, possibly. But now I'm like, I don't know. One other point was a lot of people said, well, and unfortunately, and I love John Green, but John Green always used to say, well, Roger Patterson did not have the wherewithal to make these anatomical these anatomical points, like having a lack of neck, having it turn the way it did because a gorilla can't, because of the lack of a neck. So obviously Roger couldn't have created a suit that was anatomically correct, and he didn't. If this is a suit, he didn't, because you have a female with a sagittal crest. So those are some of the down points. So right now I'm kind of on the fence about the whole thing. I used to be really pro Patterson, but after learning these things over years, and the funny thing is when you revisit material, especially years, when you first get into this, and this is something about new researchers, your filter is on. You're trying to, this is kind of negative, so I'm just going to skim over this and look at the pro. But as you get older, wiser, deal with more and more events and investigations, you tend to get a little more, so you tend to revisit some of the stuff, and you look at it with a more skeptical eye. Either that, or you go completely off reservation and begin like, oh, it's an alien, or it's a shapeshifter, or it's a wormhole jumper. So there's two things those frustrations do: something productive.
Why did Roger Patterson rent the camera?
Because he didn't own one.
Well, didn't he not want to make a Bigfoot movie?
Well, yeah. Well, that's the whole thing. Well, yeah, he had gotten funded. He had gotten funded by, I believe, Al Del Atley
to make a Bigfoot movie.
Make a Bigfoot movie. So
coincidentally,
well, let's face it. You're if you're going to get it, I can't put that into there, because if I go out tomorrow and want to make a Bigfoot movie or a documentary, like how many YouTubers we got on there that believe they have caught something that's real when they're going out looking for Bigfoot. I mean, you can't equate that necessarily. As an investigator in logic, is it kind of odd? Well, maybe, but he had been researching it for years, so he knows that area, he knows where the sightings are. I mean, this is the argument that could be made for that. So I'm going to make a movie, and he just happened to hit pay dirt. And
that looks exactly like the drawing he made a few years.
But that separately it looks okay. But when you put it all together, now it sounds like I say, a piece of evidence on its own, not indicative of a hoax. But when you start putting it all together, it looks mighty suspicious, and that's the investigator principle.
Yeah, that's why it's not one of my top 3 all-time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sightings. Yeah, it's I've believed in it for the longest time. Then the Phil Morris stuff popped up, and the guy's got he said he sold him the suit for like $1,000, and it was a really expensive suit. So what do you want a monkey suit for so much money? And supposedly he was advising him on how to, trick it up a little bit and put on the shoulder pads and the nylon stuff to hold up the boot.
I don't believe that for a New York Minute.
Yeah.
It just sounds like he, to me, number one, he could never prove he sold it to Roger. Could never prove it, who he sold it to.
Well, he had spoken to Roger, right?
No, there was no proof he ever did.
Well, there was no proof, but he said that was the guy I sold.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, that was the guy. I got you.
Yeah. I mean, he could say anything at this point. Roger's dead. Al Del Atley flatly denied that they ever had any interlude with Philip Morris. So You know, it's a point where his suit doesn't match Bob Hieronymus. Now, Bob Hieronymus coincidentally had taken a couple of lie detector tests and passed.
Yeah.
Philip Morris never took.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you think about it, okay, what would be the purpose of outing Roger after selling him the suit? And why so long? Why after? Because Bob Hieronymus came on, I'm going to jump on the bandwagon. At the time, Hieronymus was being involved in a lawsuit with copyright infringement off of another, he was making costumes that was infringing on copyright to somebody else. So he's just trying to get his 15 minutes of fame and get his business spurned up because he's taking a loss in money. He comes out with the Patterson Gimlin film at that time.
Yeah, anything's possible. Let's get to the next controversial case, because it's one that a lot of people don't even know about, and it's that of a doctor named H.A. Miller. He was an MD and a forensic anatomist who supposedly worked with the forestry department, and he was called in to examine the bodies of 3 deceased Sasquatch from the West Coast and 1 from Texas. On the surface, it looks like a pretty believable document, yet you went full Detective Columbo on it, and you say it ain't so.
No, absolutely. The H.A. Miller that was the doctor, there's a lot of different layers to this.
Hold on one second, Steve. 1 second. Folks, as you've probably noticed, we are definitely experiencing a little bit of digital delay here. I'm going to try to stitch it up, so I don't know what the final product's going to sound like. Evidently, Zoom is oversubscribed to at this point. So we had this issue last night. We're apparently having a little of it today. We're just going to zip through it. I'm going to touch it up. It'll take me about 5 hours to edit everything together, but I think we're going to be pretty good. Steve, go ahead. We're talking about the H.A. Miller case.
There's so many people on Zoom. I'm afraid I should be wearing maybe a mask because I'm on Zoom.
Right.
But there's 2 layers. There's 2 real layers to this. First, the people involved, and 2, the story itself. And actually, a 3rd layer, where the story originated from. So let me start with the people involved. Yes, there was an H.A. Miller that was a doctor. And according to the storyline, H.A. Miller became a forester, and then 10 years later, he became a doctor in 1940, I believe, going to Yale, or one of the Ivy League colleges. Well, here's the facts. The facts is that whatever college was claimed, there's no H.A. Miller, M.D., listed for that college. However, there was an H.A. Miller that was a doctor, and he was a doctor way back in 1914. So that puts it kind of out of the timeline. And he actually graduated out of a school in Pittsburgh, a medical school in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Not an Ivy League school. Had nothing to do with forestry. Stayed on the East Coast all his life, I believe. The H.A. Miller, yes, indeed, but there is no further reference of him anywhere except when this Miller doc came up. Now, that being said, Miller is kind of a question mark. Part 2 is the story of the bodies that came out of the Pacific, found by Lauren Staton and another guy. I forget the names she used. But it turns out that the picture she used with these people's names under that allegedly found the bodies of an old newspaper article. In fact, we know that the one guy is named, I believe, the other guy is named Buzzy Franklin. And Buzzy Franklin was one that's in the beard, smiling with the helmet on, and he's looking over at his buddy. And that picture was actually taken in 1972, not in the 60s, 1972. And Buzzy actually owned a diner, and actually there was a Bigfoot researcher that actually went to Buzzy's diner quite often up there and said, "Hey, I know Buzzy. That's him." So it turned out that the pictures that's being projected as these loggers that found the bodies were not the loggers. It was totally fraud. Now, we go to the layer number 3. This all originated from a woman by the name of Linda Newton Perry, who runs a website or a blogger site called Bigfoot Ballyhoo. Bigfoot Ballyhoo has been creating hoaxes since 2009. And the way that she does it is she'll take pictures of different things and spin it to different meanings. At one time she said, she created the Emery, Saxon, and Parchell team, the ESP team. And 2 out of the 3 guys, guess what? Actually, all 3, we found out who they were. One guy, the 2 guys, Bill Emery and Hank Parchell, actually work at the Fort Worth Exchange. And their names were Vince Chastain and Gene Tilley. So we know the real people behind the pictures in that thing. Dale Saxton, the Saxton, now Cole Saxton, the younger. We haven't been able to figure out who Cole Saxton is. But Dale Saxton, coincidentally, we found in the same photo base page as Buzzy Franklin with this whole Bigfoot H.A. Miller thing. Here's Dale Saxton's picture. And what she did was she reversed it up a little bit. And the actual picture is a guy who's chartering salmon expeditions out in Washington State. In the original picture, you even see the salmon charter, booking display where behind it is a salmon charter or something like that.
Yeah, the booking manifest.
Right. Yeah. Very interesting coincidence. And then we're going to get to an exclusive, because I haven't mentioned this to anybody yet. I don't think. But one of the hoaxes she pulled off early in, I want to say around 2010, 2009, was the ESP team has this photo of a Bigfoot, a trail cam photo. It turned out it was a reversal of a screen cap of the creature from The Legend of Sasquatch from the 1976 film. And coincidentally, she has a person on her team, the ESP team, named Hank Parchell. And on The Legend of Sasquatch, there's a team member named Hank Parchell. Very close. So where does this mean to here? Well, it turns out, and we're going to be confirming this because I just ordered the book. But in doing some research, there is a book called Bigfoot Declassified, a government guide to Sasquatch. It was a parody written in, coincidentally, 2009. And it was written, I believe that some of the narrative from that was taken out of this book. Because when I Google search certain strings of the prose of the Miller Report, this book keeps popping up.
Yeah, imagine
so
that.
And here's the coincidence of it. The writer of the book starts off, we heard of H.A. Miller. Well, the guy who wrote this book, I believe, is M.P. Gordon. So it's another guy that uses
pseudonyms or fake names.
Actually his real name is Michael.
Oh, I got you. Okay.
But he uses his 2 initials and his last name, much like H.A. Miller.
Trinomials type deals. Yeah, writers do it all the time.
So the Miller doc originates from this Bigfoot Ballyhoo site, which has a long list of hoaxes. And if anybody wants to see the hoaxes, I have something called the Hall of Shame on my website. And there's a whole list of the hoaxes to date.
So we're going to get into number 3, but number 2 we both touched. But so before we get to that third case, we had some interaction separately with a hoax that was uncovered in the early going. You smelled a rat boots on the ground standpoint, and I came into it a little later after it made the national news, and they had approached a production company I knew who was considering throwing $100K into buying the rights to shoot this, to put this on the air. And it was another dead body. And after I chatted with the attorney who was representing the hoaxers, that consideration was dusted because obviously it was a hoax to me. But you had been working on it early on. And go ahead and explain to us which that was, because people who are familiar with Bigfoot hoaxes know exactly who these guys are.
Oh yeah. That was very interesting how that all set up. But to make a long story condensed for the Reader's Digest version, Yeah, Dyer and Witten were the two originators. They came from Clayton County, Georgia, and they had kind of. We've been trying to get them on the show, kind of expose their lives a little bit, and then there was an interdiction of them wanting to talk to Tom Biscardi. And at the time, a lot of people didn't know I was running an undercover op in Biscardi's group. I was actually gathering a lot of intelligence to see if they were hoaxing and stuff like that. So anyway, the whole thing got muddled up, and Biscardi called me afterwards, wanting to. Oh well, I if they got it, they got it. But we started doing some verifications, and the last conversation I had with Biscardi was, and Biscardi was like, I know they're BSing us. I'm going to go call them up and give them a piece of my mind. That was the last time I had an honest conversation, I think, with Biscardi, where he told me any semblance of the truth. Because then he says, oh, I think they really got it, and yada, yada, yada. And then for whatever reason, the other two guys weren't contacting me anymore. Yeah. So fast forward, we get to where they pick up the body. They bring it to a place called Eaton, Indiana. They pay $50,000. Biscardi gets one of his usual Searching for Bigfoot Incorporated investors to put up front the $50,000 the two guys from Georgia wanted. He takes it out of an ATM, goes down there, delivers everything. Wow, delivering $50,000 cash. And they take off with the body, which was at the time supposed to have been thawed, but it wasn't. It was still frozen in the freezer. So the freezer probably weighed pretty close to a ton, I would say, maybe more. They take it to Eaton, Indiana. I arrived shortly thereafter, and between me and Biscardi's son, who a lot of people don't understand, the sins of the father don't always pass off. Biscardi's son really wanted to fight. We listened to Coast that night, and we had heard, this guy saying, well, I recognize this in my suit. It's been altered a little bit, blah, 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 extra early in the morning before everybody else. And we started chipping away at it. And eventually we found it was a hoax. So was playing this little charade. How should I say? Cover the hoax up with another
hoax.
Yeah. He wanted everybody to sign an NDA and say, we'll just say this, that, the public pressure was too down to, we're going to have him take the body back and we'll just never talk about it again. And I was like, no, I ain't doing that. This is a hoax. I was fuming mad. The week prior, Biscardi had mentioned that he had contacted and was having the producers of the alien autopsy video come out to film the body. So I have a feeling with the whole, and eventually I contacted Rick Dyer several months later. I had flown down to Georgia, and he had gotten me anything I wanted, where they took the body up, and I recognized that area from the video, where they exchanged the money, where the meetings were, and I knew all this stuff was congruent. And then the final thing he was like, hey, and now mind you, I've been running a diary on all of this movement stuff going on. And what I had done was, I said, well, let me show you the freezer that we had bought. I can take you to the store. I go, better yet, can you get me a receipt? Absolutely. So he went up to the young lady. He said, listen, I bought a freezer here in August. Can I get my receipt? Here's my ID, blah, blah, blah. Woman looks it up, pulls the receipt out of her printer, hands it to him. He hands it to me. So now I know I have the original receipt, the right receipt. And it was the night Biscardi flew in.
Yeah.
So Biscardi's, I touched it, I smelled it, I felt it when he was going on the news promoting all this, to after it was frozen, after it was discovered as fake. Well, it was frozen in ice, and I never realized, I just kind of poked the top of it. Well, yeah. Guess what, Buster? You can't freeze 124 cubic feet of water overnight. It's going to take a few days for it to freeze in that freezer. So I knew that had. Now, the other thing, too, that the Dyer told me is that Biscardi had actually bought the spray paint that was painted on the mask. And I'll tell you something. I had a little subversive attempt at the Searching for Bigfoot VP, who tried to convinced me that he believed now Tom was involved in the hoax and was really pressing me. That credit card receipt for that paint? You have the credit card receipt for the paint. He was really worried about that. So to me, you know, that paranoia kind of believes it. But the bottom line, I also have the 89-page police report that was made out of this. So, and that was the subject of my first book I wrote. And what it just shows is that, you know, Biscardi was involved in it up to his neck and was looking to make a quick buck, whether it be the $100,000 from this production company, because so that kind of makes sense to me too. He makes a quick $25,000. His investor makes a quick $25,000, and everybody's happy. So that kind of makes sense to me.
Yeah,
because the dollar amounts are nice and even. But I really think he was expecting to make millions off that because he wanted royalties. I know that.
Yeah, it's probably not worth the hit to the reputation. Plus, to me, it seemed as though they were just trying to reproduce the Minnesota Iceman thing, which actually could be up there with the top 3 hoaxes of all time.
Rick Dyer came out to implicate the alien autopsy hoax.
Yeah.
Using a Bigfoot. That was it, plain and simple. And that made sense. That clicked, that puzzle piece fit. When Dyer said that to me, I go, that's right, because look at my diary. On Tuesday, hey, I got the guys who made the alien autopsy video coming in to videotape it. And then Dyer tells me that, yeah, they were trying to make an alien autopsy video. That would have made sense. Get everybody to sign an NDA, because eventually we were going to find out it's fake.
Yeah.
Get everybody to sign an NDA. And guess what? We can't say nothing under the penalty of severe lawsuit and loss of money. So that's why, no, I'm not signing an NDA. Sorry.
Yeah, with the alien autopsy, they already had a deal set up with that. They already had the production company. I know a lot about that one, actually. Hey, let's get into the third most controversial, because it really might be the first most. And you know, Todd Standing is a pretty controversial character. You know, some of his evidence seems plausible to some, but frankly, anything having to do with him seems to be of a dubious nature. I'll pull up the graphics. Tell me about Todd Standing.
Okay, well, a lot of people don't understand Todd Standing first showed up on the scene for 2005. And his website was set up to be like this mysterious, there's a land called Sylvanic only, being able to enter it through this small cavernous hole and then into this wonderful valley. And then eventually the government sealed it up. See, the government conspiracy come. He also claims to have gotten, in his early days, hundreds of hair samples. Of course, coincidentally, his apartment got broken into and they all got stolen.
Yeah, hair thieves.
Yeah, you have all these kind of reminds me of a scene of Borat.
Right. The 12 metric tons of pubis. That's the
so anyway, you know, God, so this whole thing was like, this is a joke. And a lot of people don't understand. Todd Standing owned the production company at the time called Outstanding Production, but he hid who he was. He called himself Todd Rockwell as the managing partner of Outstanding Productions, which was kind of really weird. And a lot of the productions was doing commercials for strip clubs. That was another weird thing. So as we evolve, we have Sylvanic Video 1, which was kind of like a teaser to this Blair Witch type of found footage movie he was trying to put up. And there was a very corny, canny woman going where they like tracks. Oh, there's little goat tracks. Oh, what do we have here? Just like that. Say it just like that. All of a sudden you see this tree start to shake with snow coming up. And then the film cuts. Like, come on. Nobody, you know, is that your typical reaction when you find Bigfoot tracks? Oh, what do we have here? You know, just typical bad acting type of things. And at the time, there was also an article or an ad looking for actors and actresses with Standing's phone number attached to it. So and if you look at the IMDb, there are actors that he had hired to play parts. And so if you look at Sylvanic under IMDb, you find all these things.
Yeah.
So we fast forward into, well, what about all these headshots? Well, number one, the first one they called the Muppet. And that was the headshot. It kind of looked like an Eskimo because it looked like it kind of had a hood on or something.
Yeah.
No, well, oh no, it just didn't look real. It looked kind of felty, whatnot. And it was a headshot. Coincidentally, a few years later, he comes out with another headshot. Then 2 years after that, he morphs it into a blinking video. Fast forward now to the last event, you have a picture. Now you don't even get the whole headshot. You just get, or I should say more accurately, this.
Right. The eyes, top of the nose profile.
See,
right.
Since then, I've developed sources close to the and in the know about some of Todd's doings the last couple of years. And it was, to me, my source said that was his father. So the moles on the face line up with the moles around the eyes of the creature, a little scar on the picture. Coincidentally, there was another scene in his latest piece of thing that had a hand grabbing an apple, right? So as it turned out, this Canadian blogger went with Todd Standing and blogged it, and then very secretly said, "Hey, you know what? On the back seat of Todd's truck, there appears to be a pair of Sasquatch gloves or gorilla gloves." And just by coincidence, in one of his films, he's got a hand reaching out there. Well, I found out through sources who that was. I'm going to keep that under wraps because there's a lot of personal stuff going on involved with that. But yeah, there's no coincidence that this blogger would find Sasquatch hands, and coincidentally on his new video, he's got the hand pulling up an apple.
Sure. So,
you look at stuff like that, and his stories are always kind of, pardon the expression, they're kind of half-assed.
Yeah.
You don't get any complete detail. Well, on this day I went here, and on this day I went here, and this way I went here. You don't get any of that. I mean, hell, we got more information on the Patterson Gimlin film than any of Todd's stuff. Yeah. Other than just, no pinpointing of anything, no nothing. Now, people will come back and say, well, he went with Les Stroud and, that gives him credibility. Well, unfortunately, it gave him some foul credibility. If we forget our history, don't remember John Wayne Gacy had his picture taken with Rosalind Carter. So to me, that means nothing. It was just probably Les's production team going, hey, do a show on Bigfoot because I had these experiences. So his production team looked around and said, hey, we have this Canadian guy because Les is Canadian that does Bigfoot. Let's grab him. And I know I've seen, there are production teams that do a deep dive, and there are production teams that just do a on the face dive, or they just do something on the face. What they did. So they involved Meldrum. They involved he's the biggest scientific name in the Bigfoot world. And then he involved Dr. John Bindernagel, who is a biologist. And where Todd took them actually was not Sylvanic, because remember, Sylvanic had been
sealed off.
He actually took him into a person by the name of Jamie R. Cahn's research area. So he took him into an area where there was known to be a lot of Sasquatch activity.
Yeah.
So people say, well, he took him out there and they found big deal. I mean, if I went out there too, I probably may have had an experience. I spent enough time out there.
Yeah.
So it was no big deal, no great deal that, there was no, this wasn't Todd at his best. This was Todd, basically going into somebody else's research area because he was shown that. So.
That's interesting. He had his father working with him. He had gorilla gloves or Bigfoot gloves. And there's just a lot of evidence. And there's people who basically say he hired me to act in his video.
Well, we also have a little bit of information which we're working on. Of course, all the stuff we're investigations take time.
Yeah.
And people get very frustrated at times. They were frustrated with the Georgia Bigfoot hoax, especially because there was so many people involved with that. But investigations aren't on what's popular or aren't what necessarily is speedy. Investigations take time. It takes time to develop sources. It takes time to interpret evidence and develop evidence. So, but we actually have a lead on the running Sasquatch in his video. We actually know that it's a firefighter from Edmonton. So we're working on that lead too.
Yeah, it looked like a dude anyway. All right, so let's get into, drum roll please, as we close out. We're going to do our top 3 lists. I'm going to give you, we didn't tell each other which our top 3 were. There's so many of them. There's a lot of legitimate stuff out there too. But give me your top 3 biggest hoaxes.
Top 3 biggest
Kulls,
hoaxes.
top 3 biggest hoaxes. Drum roll. We've got a sound effect right now, and boom, go.
Number 3, the Memorial Day video. Very much a hoax. Number 2, Curlo. The rift between Roger Patterson and John Green and the whole crew there. And my number hoax would be probably the 2005 Stagecoach Nevada hoax put on by Tom Biscardi, where he went on the coast to coast stating he had a creature, got top scientists looking at it right now.
Oh, yeah.
And
I remember that one.
So, that to me has always been my favorite.
So your top 3 again, because now we're having more digital drop off here. Your top 3 were, again, in order.
Number 1 would be the Biscardi Stagecoach hoax.
Yeah, what was number 2 again? Because unfortunately, it's like as soon as you started giving your list, you started having problems.
I believe the year was I want to say 66 or 67. There was a gentleman by the name of Frank Curlo who had a partner who kind of dropped out of sight after. But he had claimed he had a Bigfoot body and hidden in the cave, and was trying to parlay Rennie DeHinden and John Green and Roger Patterson to basically get it. And there was everybody was rushing to get the body first, and that caused a lot. And that's the reason why that to me is one of the top hoaxes, because it caused dissension amongst the legends of the Bigfoot world.
Okay. So we're going to, folks, like I said, we're having some technical issues. I'll piece that one together. But here are mine. The Ontario Bigfoot series of voice recordings. I wanted those to be so real, but, I've just heard that they're quite not. Todd Standing. Too much ancillary noise from those who claim he recruited them to produce fake segments. And then number 1 for me is anything on Finding Bigfoot. I watched every episode, but I'm not buying anything that they do, although individually they're credible people. The show itself is not.
Well, the interesting thing is that, I've actually dealt with a couple of productions of Finding Bigfoot that actually provided a couple of witnesses for their segments. And they're on a time schedule, man. And it's
right.
Let's go. Right. So I think individually the actors want the talent wanted to do more, but they're on a very tight schedule. So I mean,
totally agree. The witnesses legit, the individuals legit. The show, it's a show.
Editing, yep. It's all in the editing, yep.
Right,
exactly.
So the top 3 most legit. I'll go first this time, and I have a 4th. We could just call it honorable mention. Okay.
Oh, he's throwing in the winger.
I am. So, but this is an interesting one because I believe, although at the time there were a lot of hoaxes with fairies and stuff like this, you might already know which one I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. But anyway, my top 3 is the New York tree swinger, which you can see these guys are just screwing around at a campsite at Lake Lembo up in upstate New York, not probably too far from you, which is just a huge, massive forested area with a lot of lakes. There's so much territory up there for them, and there's that what looks like a chimp just swinging in a tree, but you see a big or somebody walking in underneath the tree in the background. No one even notices it, but it's predominant when you look in the video. That's number 1. Number 2, the construction site tree slinger, because it's a very massive subject and it's throwing a tree. It was not a 80-foot pine, but it was a tree that's not so easy. It looked like it was sort of like throwing a javelin, but it looked like a very big subject, and it looks like what apes do. And then there's the Georgia cop dashboard cam, number 3 for me, where these cops are just driving, talking, BS, and all of a sudden something takes 2 steps and it's across the freeway into the dark, swampy area of Georgia, which to me is like, what else does that? My third, the honorable mention, is the three Squatcheteers from a 1905 cave photo that shows three pairs of glowing eyes on hominid-shaped creatures in the dark. Now, either they were owls, they might have been, or they were big creatures. And supposedly this guy was leaning towards the idea that there were some really big creatures in there. That's why he ran away and left the camera in there to overexpose.
Yeah.
Your turn.
My turn. Okay, so I'm going to go in reverse order. My number 3, and I'm going to go out on a limb here. I kind of like the length of the video. It doesn't seem overly processed. It just seems like a guy out there doing his thing. So I'm kind of good with the Freeman footage. I kind of like it.
I almost went Freeman. I had Freeman. I took him off just because it wasn't 100%. But he would. Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, and to me, you don't have to be 100%. I like it. I mean, I like it. I don't see anything necessarily wrong with it.
Get up here,
maybe he's had a history where something had happened in the past, but there wasn't a long track record of anything. The second one is the Vermont trail cam photo taken in 2010 in Hubbardton, Vermont, or the Hubbardton area of Vermont, right off of Lake Bomazine. I was really one of the first people to do a deep dive on that one and put it out to the public. And I had gotten Dr. Bruce Maccabee to do is this something in front of the camera or something on the ground? And he said, oh, it's definitely on the ground because the parallax view and the shadowing. My number 1 is AKA the tree swinger.
Oh.
I was the first one ever to see that video in the Bigfoot research world. I had gotten 2002 or maybe 2003 because it took them a while. And I remember putting that and I had gotten the copy. I remember putting that in my VCR back in the day for the very first time. I had a giant screen TV. And the first thing was, what the hell is that big thing? Says you can see that the little one comes off the big one. It's back. It climbs up in the tree, hand over hand. I spent hundreds of hours looking at every single frame of. And you can see, there's a process and what you do is you watch the activity where it's the main point and work it backwards. Because sometimes when you can't see where something comes up. So if you work the thing backwards, then you can say, okay. Now when I know where to look at the beginning. So the minute that video starts, you see something going on. The big one steps out and starts moving, and it's all dark. And I've talked to the guy. I've talked to Mike Lembo, the man who owned Lembo Lake, and I've been to the area. By the time I had gotten the information, the whole area had been turned into an ATV park. So there was no sense in me doing an on-scene investigation. It had already been 5 or 6 years at that point. But I actually ended up going there, I think in 2011 or 2012, doing a scout for finding Bigfoot. Interviewed Doug and Doug Pridgeon, the guy who filmed it and everything, and do a little bit about it. And I noticed when I went up there, of all the wild apple orchards that were up there, because that whole area is a lot of apple orchards.
Yeah.
And there's also wild strawberries, wild blackberries, wild raspberries, wild blueberries.
Deer,
all over there.
Yeah.
I mean, that whole area was just overrun with fruit. It used to be probably a fruit farm.
Yeah.
And it just, over the years, and it just grew wild. So, yeah, it's just something that can't be explained by human. It doesn't make the common sense things to me, obviously, is, well, maybe it's somebody, well, you can't own a primate in New York. They weren't allowing animals into the park because of insurance reasons. And if you owned a chimpanzee, would you just let it go climb up in a tree? You're not going to get it back.
You'll never get it back.
Not at dusk. You're not going to get it back.
Right.
So none of that stuff made sense to me. Kind of like when I go back, and that's how I kind of look at things, like the Vermont trail cam photo. Because we've already killed that it's something flying in front of the camera through the scientist. Maybe it's somebody in a ghillie suit. Well, number 1, it's not hunting season. Number 2, the whole area. 3, it's a front yard. Number 4, there's no gun. So you have all these things that just defy common sense, and it actually makes more sense for these other explanations.
Yeah.
So.
The ghillie suit thing is something. I looked at that and I thought, it looks like there's a little baby Bigfoot there. It might be holding something. I had to take a look at it for quite a while. It's up there. It's pretty interesting, and it's so much bigger than any human.
Like
twice the size, twice the body weight, easy.
Yeah,
not more. But Steve, you've got 3 books. What are they, and where can they get them?
They all can be found on Amazon.com. Just Google my name, Steve Kulls, and it should come up on the author. My first book I wrote was way back when, 2010, I believe, 50 Large, the story of the Bigfoot body hoax. That goes into my deep dive undercover investigation, searching for Bigfoot, and the subsequent lead up to the hoax and aftermath. My second book is What Would Sasquatch Do? Kind of a play off of What Would Jesus Do? But
Right.
What Would Sasquatch Do? It's looking at Sasquatch behavior using primate behavior. So, in seeing the similarities and understanding how a primate lives is a very easy pathway to, perhaps investigate sightings, what kind of behavior it's doing. And my final book is the Sasquatch Playbook, which I just came out last February, but thanks to COVID, it hasn't really been in great circulation. Usually I do a lot of book sales at shows and stuff, but without the shows. But the Sasquatch Playbook is Bigfoot believers look at the Bigfoot world basically through the eyes of a skeptic. So I'm taking all these big, in some of the cases, I take some of the biggest footballs of the Bigfoot community, like the Ketchum Project, like the Patterson Gimlin film, and put a little skeptical eye to it. Not necessarily rule everything out, but put a skeptical eye to it in some cases.
As we all need to do, because like I said at the beginning of the show, hoaxes don't help our cause at all. And, I think that's important that we be able to ferret them out and get rid of them and call them for what they are. Meanwhile, folks, I want to thank Steve Kulls again for joining us. And Steve, again, go to his website, which is squatchdetective.com, and you've got your Facebook page and of course your YouTube page. Yes. Have a great holiday season.
Oh, you as well.
Thank you very much, folks. Subscribe to the show if you can. Definitely like it, comment, share, all those good things. COVID was the reason why we started this. I grew bored listening to other people's shows, and I've got some pretty decent contacts out there. So COVID, for me, was a blessing that we were able to put the Phenomenon Report together and bring you guys like Steve Kulls over here. So have yourself a great holiday. We'll see you in the flip-flop. 2021 is right around the corner. Hold tight. We're almost there, and we'll get there together. Cheers.